We can make a bunch of videos about how great it is. But what we realize is that like that's just the catalyst. Like the degree is just the catalyst. The actual change and the real story is within the individuals. This focus on the overall transformation that people go through for their family or for their personal lives. It's taking that step and using the degree to make the change for themselves. But like it's that act that we realize is what we want to focus on, and how that looks like for everybody is different. And capturing that like a little lightning in a bottle on a video form, how we want to tell that story and how it can be an impactful thing for people.
Rob, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Ryan. Thanks for the invite. I'm a creative producer for UT San Antonio's video production group. What that means is that we have a special team that goes around and they interview folks for a variety of different reasons. We're housed under academic innovation, and we have a variety of different internal clients. So one specific client would be UTSA Online. And so what we do is we develop a variety of different types of creative assets, and they usually stem from interviews. And we build marketing and creative assets from those interviews that really kind of promote the program. And we do a bunch of other really cool video stuff, but that's kind of the gist of it. So I help lead the team of videographers, editors, coming together to align a vision and to basically execute a project.
Excellent. And that's exactly what our students are doing. The digital media influence majors are doing exactly this. So let's start at the beginning. You're starting with some form of research. Can you walk us through what that looks like?
Yeah, so it typically stems from a big pre-production interview with like why we are doing this video in the first place. So, what is the purpose of the video? If there's a new program offered on UTSA Online, for example, we did one most recently on cybersecurity. So, there's a gentleman who we met, and we had a chance to interview him, learn about his background, and how that might resonate with other folks. What we did is a great deal of research on folks who may be new to the industry in cybersecurity, folks who may be returning to the industry, and folks who may be trying to pivot and do something new. So a variety of different audiences we're trying to reach. And we've researched the pain points, the issues that they may be dealing with. And then we talk about a bit about the professor's background. And a lot of the times, believe it or not, certain things that the professor has gone through really aligns and certainly resonates with students who may be maybe new to the program. We do a great deal of research on why the video is purposeful in the first place. Hope that helped.
Absolutely. It sounds like you're doing deep audience research, which is one of the things we always encourage people to start with. What other things are you starting with outside of that deep audience research? And of course, your client research and your talent research.
A big issue, or rather big point of concern is the format of the videos that we're going to create. So like, is the video format, is it geared towards social media platform? Is it really, how will it reach the audience? That has been a big topic of interest. How we set up the camera, the orientation of the camera, what might reach a platform a different way. And in addition to the subject matter, how we're going about and producing the content has also been a big topic of discussion as of late.
As you're planning this process with these interviews, after you've done your research, you enter kind of a planning phase. Can you walk us through what that looks like?
The planning is for me the most important part as a creator, and it's my favorite part because it brings all of the heads together, all of the stakeholders, if you will, to really kind of align that vision. The pre-production stage is crucial to that planning stage. And again, it's taking the research that we put together about why this video might move a mark or move the needle rather, and how it will. And the planning stage is really takes in everything from the content, everything from the subject matter, and then obviously how the video is going to be done. So like where it's going to be, where it will take place, the gear that we'll need, and then you bring the crew and everybody together to go through scripts, to go through questions if there are interviews, if it's a different type of production, and really bring everything onto the table to say, okay, here's how we're going to execute this plan. So I think that's my most my favorite part of the process.
And a lot of our students don't have access to the amazing kind of production gear that you might have access to. They're using a phone and a tripod and maybe a mic if we're lucky. What advice do you have for them for overcoming that lack of production equipment? iPhones are awesome, these technologies are fantastic, but they're nothing like these higher grade cameras and mics and things.
So this is true. But I think this fundamental about why we're studying communication is even more important. So like how you communicate can be better than the type of video that you're watching. So if you watch somebody who may not be able to communicate a subject very well, but there's great production value, it may not be that effective as a video. But if you know how to communicate, you really know your subject matter and you know the purpose and how to do that effectively, a phone may be all you need. And so just being confident in your abilities, I think really can carry a long way should you just have a phone and some clip-on mics. I think we're seeing a lot of videos being produced that way. But what I will say though is just a crucial and a big emphasis on audio. So how your audio is recorded will absolutely make a difference on whether or not people will stay and watch the video. That's one piece of information I kind of just will have people make a note about.
I feel like audio is one of those things that people will bail on if it's not good way faster than if your video content production quality might be just a little bit less.
Certainly.
For example, lighting is something that we always tell people to focus on, even with the smaller cameras. What are some other things that you look for as a professional?
On the topic of lighting, just so I can kind of maybe break down my set right now, I've got a lighting behind me to kind of just make things interesting in the background. I've got a light in front of me. But on my big screen, because I'm talking to you on my phone, I have Google Docs up with just a blank doc because it's white light that's bouncing off and creating a bit of a fill effect. So what I've learned just using a bit more professional equipment, that lighting is important as well, because if you're lit in these kind of 3-point lighting ways, it will make the subject in the picture a bit better. And people will tend to stay for something a bit longer in that way. You can really learn how to use lighting in a whole bunch of different ways that can be effective with small, really kind of just like consumer grade LEDs now. You can bounce an LED off a whiteboard and really kind of make a bigger fill light. Being creative and being resourceful with some more household objects, you can really do a lot with. And I've seen a lot of YouTube shorts. People pull off some cool stuff with, you wouldn't think that's what they're using, but yeah, you can certainly be creative to do that.
And I know some people sometimes they'll like place the plants a certain way, or like I have my Lord of the Rings poster, I've got my Yoda, I've got some toys back there that kind of tell you a little bit about what I'm into and what I like. I did that in part because I'm teaching AI and personal branding, and part of personal branding is leaning into what you love as you teach or as you perform the skill or as you work with a client. And I know that that's just as important in digital storytelling. I know that when you're interviewing someone, you have a production setup that you probably rely on and a checklist in your mind. Can you share that with us?
From the beginning, pre-production starts with generally thinking about the purpose of the video, and then it's really thinking about the questions and the kind of responses or the prompts that you rather will share, elicit the responses that you want. It just certainly depends on the type of interview, but what I can also share, and just to kind of really keep things more recent and fresh with our current workflow, is we do a pre-production interview with a lot of our interviews and productions. The pre-production interview is where we're on Zoom. We're really just kind of like getting to know individuals from the very beginning. And we have a list of questions really to get to know individuals a bit more, but really are open-ended so that we can kind of learn. It's a learning opportunity, because everything we take from that pre-production, we take the transcript. And lately we've been using Claude in my case to really dive deeper with the transcript. So what's really helped in my part on the front end is being able to communicate once I've gone through and learned from the transcript, taken whatever epiphanies I may have learned, and storyboards most importantly. And all of that has helped how I communicate with my team, how I communicate with other stakeholders if I'm working with other stakeholders on the video. That's really sped up the process and really allowed me to be more creative in how we want to frame a composition, and really taking a bit of the grunt work, because pre-production, as I said, is my favorite, but it's a lot of work because you really have to think about the questions, like, as I said, are going to elicit the response that you want. Obviously, things may happen on the front end, or things may happen on the day of, but you really do a lot of front end planning, front load work to ultimately achieve the goal. So that's kind of in a roundabout way of the planning part of the purpose. That's the general questions. But then it goes to very technical. You start thinking about the layout of the video, the layout of the room. We do a stakeout, if you will. We go to the location prior to the production date. We take a bunch of photos from different perspectives in the room, should we be available to, and really kind of lay out the general interview production layout, which is you've got your subject, you've got your 3-point lighting, you've got a boom mic above them, you've got a lav clipped, and you've got a producer talking to them. And they're generally talking to the producer. Lately, when I first got a part of the team, we were doing a lot of the straight camera talking, and that just felt very commercial. And lately, there's been a push to be a bit more authentic, to be a bit more creative, to shoot a bit more cinematically. And so that's allowed us to play with the compositions of the cameras, to show to really that the person's talking to somebody rather than a camera, and really that the cameras are making you feel like you're a fly on the wall, fly on the wall rather. You're in the room, and that's a bit more of an authentic experience for the layout of the production.
I love this movement towards more of a film aesthetic. And for the person who is being interviewed, I'm sure that you're putting them at ease because you're showing them that you know what you're doing as you set up things. I remember when you interviewed me after I think it was our initial AI Summit conference. We were at downtown UT San Antonio's campus, and you were so quick. You're like, lob, boom. Okay, angle, boom, you're good. Okay, mic check, good. And then you were asking your questions, and I felt so at ease knowing that I had such a professional who was handling those things. What do you do when you have more lead time? Because that was no lead time at all. It was just like you just gave a talk. Now we're going to interview you, right?
When you have a lot more lead time and you have a lot more help, like more people on your team, and say you are the main producer, what you just described, Ryan, is something I learned just like years in being doing this type of work, knowing what to look for, and I was able to take care of the technical stuff quickly. But the thing that I really focused on remembering that interview, what I really try to keep top of mind on, if I have the time to do it, and because we all should, because at the end of the day, we're just human beings, is making people feel comfortable that they're just talking to another person. There's a lot of gear, maybe there's a little bit of gear around, but people freeze up and people get uncomfortable. So meeting people at a really human level, that just like breaking things down, being very grateful for people's time, and expressing that gratitude in pre-production interviews and pre-production emails and all of the communication that goes around setting it up a production is super important. In my opinion, I think that human work is why we shouldn't really worry about AI taking our jobs as creatives, because as humans, I feel like our job is to be creative and our job is to connect with other people. Should the time permit, should the lead time permit, always know and think about, how will this video resonate with my audience? A real world example. We're going through scripts. We interviewed a graduate, and you might remember her, a recent graduate, Melinda Martini, shared her story about how she was a stop out graduate. So she stopped out for a little bit. She came back and she's graduating. And there's a great deal of shame with being a stop out. So right now we're going through some of the scripts, and we're thinking like, does the word impact mean the same to a stop out graduate as it would somebody who just went to school right off the bat? And what words can really resonate with a stop out? Impact, I don't think really moves the needle. So right now we have the lead time to think about those scripts to say, should we replace another word? Should we rephrase this altogether? And we have time to bounce ideas off of and other people to do that. So really think about how the purpose of the video, what it is ultimately, and how will it resonate or impact your audience.
That's key, isn't it? It's all about how it will impact and resonate with that target audience. We talked about research, we've talked a little bit about planning. Are there other things that you do in the planning process that are important for people, especially for folks who are just coming to this fresh? They don't have your years of experience. They haven't had your failures and your triumphs. What advice do you have for them on that planning part?
Planning part does take a bit of time to be inspired and to be creative. Taking time to watch other videos, to really be inspired by their compositions, and take notes and build a mood board is all essential to the planning part of the vision, aligning the vision on how things will be aesthetically, and how you're going to achieve that. So mood boards, I think, serve a big purpose on the planning that people shouldn't overlook.
So take the time to create that storyboard, that mood board, those visual representations. Don't wait until after the interview to have those ideas loaded up, because they might impact the kinds of questions you're asking, because you're asking questions to elicit a specific kind of story that will have an impact, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay. So we talked about research, we talked about planning. Let's talk a little bit about implementation. And this includes the actual interview itself. Like I remember when you interviewed me, I was all warmed up because I had just given a presentation to colleagues. I it wasn't tongue-tied as much as I might be early in the morning when I first wake up and I haven't yet started talking to anyone. I think that meeting them in a moment when they're comfortable and your ability to make them comfortable are important. And we talked a little bit about that. I heard that you said you had both a lav and a boom mic. What are some of those other little things that we need to pay attention to in the interview process?
In the interview process, what tends to happen if you're interviewing, tend to respond very quickly to what somebody's saying. And that's great. I mean, obviously, like we want to affirm what people are saying and make sure that we're nodding and stuff. If you're a bit more vocal or verbal, it can make the editing process a bit difficult. And so being as authentic as you can, but giving people like pausing after they say something and kind of giving them that nod and just kind of like non-verbally affirming what they're saying really helps build a bit of space so when we are editing so you can make things a bit clearer. If you tend to just respond um, impulsively, you're going to see that you may hear a lot of, okay, yeah, oh, that's great. Or yes, I know what you mean. And that this has ultimately helped with getting a clear signal of what of the subject's saying. So that's one thing to consider is knowing how to just think about the final product in real time.
That seems like it's really hard though. Like thinking about the final product in real time while you're trying to remain present, while you're trying to think of the next question, while you're trying to maybe piggyback off an idea that was just shared. You you are you having like a theme in the back of your mind or do you have an entire story world planned out?
It certainly just depends. I mean, it certainly that's a lot of where the pre-production work goes into play. And if you have another producer, you have another stakeholder who's involved, you really think about like, what are we trying to achieve here? And I think those conversations, Ryan, have been at the forefront as of lately because AI is so prevalent in how we do work and how we see work. People ultimately want to feel a bit more authentic communication to them as they're consuming information. So lately it's like, are we building another commercial for somebody to like feel good about? Or are we building content that's going to make people ask questions and maybe make people change behavior or drive to action? And obviously we want to do all the above, but if you're trying to reach everybody, you're not reaching anyone.
And it's such good advice. We talk about niching down in personal branding. We talk about finding your audience in podcasting. In digital storytelling, those basic principles are the same. What's different? I know that you had some experience working with NPR before you came to UT San Antonio. There are differences there too. What are some of the things that you were able to pull through from those experiences to apply to this experience?
The kind of content that we build, and I think the ability to bring an experience or really a sort of place even just to an audience is a very important skill to have. And storytelling through the act of creating a news piece or an audio piece that will air on the radio, it has to be short and it has to be quick and you have to reach an audience quickly. So having the skill set of knowing how to bring somebody to where you are and meet people where they are as you share this story and then being curious about enough to learn how to tell that story is all very relevant to the kind of content that we're creating for UTSA Online specifically. I mean, we're talking about people, personal stories of people, but then we're talking about a broader impact. And it all comes with this act of learning. And so sharing that story very quickly is a similar kind of thing.
Do you have advice for making that kind of a quick impact? Because so many of our students are interested in short form video that will support their longer form content. Someone discovers them on short form and then they find their podcast or they find their YouTube channel or they find whatever the world that they're trying to create. What advice do you have for those students?
Man, honestly, this is something that I'm thinking about really right now because I want to create fresh content myself, like personal content that's outside of work. And how I do it, I want to always think about like how can I swim against the stream? And so what I think is really cool in certain things that I've seen that people do is take people, if it is a podcast, if it is original content, take it outside of the format that you typically see. So right now we're in front of microphones, like we're in an enclosed space where it's a controlled location. How can you really authentically go to meet people where they are and record that story, record that interview and have it feel a bit more authentic is really what I think will move the needle moving forward because AI is so real right now and people want real experiences. I think you want to take people where they are.
And I love that field approach, like getting people out where they are, where they're working, where they're playing, just where they're humaning, right? Be humans being human. Tell us about your personal content and the personal journey that you're doing outside of your UT San Antonio work.
Yeah, so a new kind of thing that I've been doing, it really started a bit during the pandemic, but a bit more frequently as in the last few years. I started running a lot more, and I've started to run in the on the trails. And so I completed my first ultra marathon here in Texas, and I want to do more of that stuff, and I want to document that process out there actually in the field. So I've looked at a number of like flying self-flying drones that will follow me. I've looked at like GoPros that can be on my chest or on my head to just take people to the ASMR, like that real human experience.
That's fantastic. And what kind of story are you telling in that running context or that trail running context?
I mean, of course, the thing that I've surrounded myself with are people who are trying new things for the first time and doing hard things and learning from that process. And that's ultimately the story of running for a lot of people. And for me, it is something that's very similar, like, but it's also something very cathartic about just dropping the present media, present technology, because I'm in front of my computer all the time and trying to find real groundwork that makes me feel good. And so that's, I think, the story of learning how to balance my life and find joy in just being detached from technology for a little bit.
And that's so difficult, isn't it? It's so hard. It's
It
so
is
hard to detach.
because I still run with my phone.
Yeah, and with GoPros sometimes and drones following,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
So that's research, planning, and implementation. What other implementation things do you think students need to be aware of when they're in the moment of setting up the shot, of telling the story? Let's say that they had their storyboard. Let's say that they had their interview questions. Let's say that they even have an idea of the B roll they want to use. What are they missing? What are we not talking about here?
I mentioned it before, but how the video, we talked a bit about the resonating factor, but I guess what that boils down to is like how the video will live and where it will live. So the format of it, I think that's just an important part to, because things are changing and we see like a lot of production houses creating vertical films now. And so I'm not saying that's the end all be all, but what I'm saying is like thinking about how to tell the story and what that format will look like for the audience, and from the user perspective or the user experience, I think is something to think about as a storyteller.
Absolutely. We use like George Lucas as an example, Star Wars an example, because obviously I love it. Whenever he was planning that movie, he had all of these others movies in mind, and he was able to cut all those other movie ideas down to one specific story. And through the dialogue and through the production process, that got changed and altered, of course, but he got focused is the point, right? He was very focused on just episode 4, for example, or just episode that beginning episode, A New Hope, right? So whenever you're interviewing someone, whenever you're putting together a project, personal or professional, are you thinking ahead to the sequels? Are you thinking about the story world in the giant big ideas and big epic scenes that might come in a future movie, if not this one, or a future project, if not this one?
I think as a writer and as a storyteller, that's an important thing to always try to do. It may not be like what's top of mind or front of mind all the time, but if you can find through lines and if you can find, especially if it's your work, if it's a bunch of your work, finding through lines and finding development and finding progress is crucial, and how it, the overarching story, how it leads to somewhere can may be important later on down the line. But I think as a creator, it's important to just kind of know that it ultimately will in some way weave itself back into what you may have done before.
Which is fun, right? Okay, so that's research, planning, and implementation. Let's talk about evaluation. With evaluation, you're getting feedback from the audience, you're getting feedback from your peers, you're getting feedback from your client. How do you know what to pay attention to? What's the signal? What's the noise?
I think what is really important is to think about the decisions that you made from the very beginning about like how this video will be effective. What I tend to try to stay away from lately is like the noise, is like the number of views, because that's very subjective and sometimes it's very hard to pin down. Being in charge in a position at TPR, Texas Public Radio, where I was looking at a lot about like numbers and how content was being consumed, gave me some insight. But now that I'm like solely right now in this position, just like in charge of just the creative and not the other end of it, what I found a bit about most effective is like debriefing with your team after the video's done to talk about the small wins. So like, was it effective in terms of like, did you even have enough batteries to produce the video like on the set? That kind of stuff, like technical stuff should be debriefed pretty quickly at the after the video. But in terms of like evaluation, one kind of hard example right now, since we're talking about online, the videos that we created, are they sort of reaching some sort of impact that's affecting enrollment? What that kind of experience for me can share with other people is like, if you have other stakeholders who are all agree that we're going to create this one video to do this one thing, if you have them all at the table at the very beginning, that should make your evaluation process a bit smoother, because you've identified how you're going to do the thing, and the evaluation just really is just crossing off the boxes. So again, it just boils back to the pre-production and why that's so important, because that brings the stakeholders all together to say, like, to align the vision, to say this is why we're doing what we're doing. But the yeah, but the evaluation, it's always going to change, I think, depending on the topic and the subject, for sure.
Yeah. You just mentioned like brand performance versus brand awareness, right? The metrics, the hard data, how many people watch this? How has this impacted enrollments? Maybe at TPR it was how has this impacted donations, which is the lifeblood of public radio. And so you have these metrics that you're comparing. And you also have this other thing that is harder to measure, which is awareness and perception. Whenever I see a video from UT San Antonio online and it's one of my former students being interviewed, I get so excited. I'm like, yes, go you. This is fantastic. And something that I notice is, wow, look at that cool depth of field. Wow, they did a really good job of lighting her in this shot. Oh man, I love that slow mo. This is so cool. And wow, I love the way they're cutting this that way. And I'm just like fanning out, right? I'm just like, this is so cool that our former student, who is now an alumni, is now being featured in this way. But the difference between brand awareness or brand perception and brand performance. Whenever you're thinking about your goals, are you always focused on the performance part, or do you sometimes have some brand awareness in the back of your mind too? Because I know that, like you said, getting caught up in the algorithm doesn't always give us good feedback, right?
Yeah, personally, I am always thinking about everything all of the time that you just mentioned, because that's just how I am. But I do think it is important to, what I've learned, and I'll say this in this new position, is that there is a great deal of benefit to have more than one person on a job, and a lot of the times we don't have the benefit. We're not afforded to have more than two people on a crew. Sometimes it's just us. But when it does happen that way, having folks to think about one less thing that you have to do can be a benefit, certainly. So if you can have somebody, a team, to identify what those goals are and how to achieve them and allow you to do something else, you're only going to be stronger, because what I've learned is that there's a lot of skills that we all have, but the most important thing that we're trying to do right now in this crew is identify our own strengths and just go all in on them, because the more strengths, the better on a crew. So, yeah, having another producer who's working with you to think about the goals, to think about the brand outside of the one creative project, will certainly be a benefit and certainly help the process overall. I've had to play a lot of the same hats, but yeah, I found that that's only going to be make the team stronger, for sure.
I love this thread because we used to teach like creative problem solving in groups. And one of the things from IDEO, this famous consultancy in I think Boston, that tells companies and consults companies on how to be more creative. One of the things they say is the greatness of the team will always succeed over the lone genius, right? So the fact that you and your team are all leaning into your own skills and really letting other people take the lead where they're comfortable and they're powerful, right? That I think is a skill that a lot of people don't get because everyone doesn't want to work with groups because they've been burned by groups before, especially in college and university life. There is a reluctance to sign up for that team experience. When in actuality, when you get out of university, it's almost always working with people and many times working more closely with people. And I love that your story exemplifies that here because you're talking about being able to trust your teammates, right?
It's an important lesson to learn.
Absolutely. So that evaluation and feedback process is enhanced by having those people to bounce things off. The difference in the process at NPR versus a client like UT San Antonio or another client, what are some of the similarities and what are some of the differences in how your work is evaluated?
At Texas Public Radio, my work, I have to say this, like I had the creative ability to kind of just produce a different types of stories and different types of programs without much evaluation, I will be honest, because it might have just to do to the nature of the time. It was during COVID, and so we were just producing tons of different types of content. And a lot of times it really didn't debrief, and a lot of times it really didn't do a post-mortem after the project had ended, after the first season or second season had completed. And what I will say is that the difference that I've seen is that here is that there is such an emphasis on the effectiveness of the product because there's some hard numbers tied to it, to enrollment and stuff. But at TPR, it was more so of building brands from the very beginning, really just building awareness. And there is actually one particular project I can think about that really wasn't a story and it wasn't a news piece at all, but it was more of an event. And I will say that it did teach me, doing this particular event after 4 seasons, that the feedback you receive from the audience directly can, and most of the time, is the most effective. And when you really take that to heart and make that change, and people recognize that after they've made the suggestion, that only builds your strength to the brand, or strengthens the brand, I should say, with that community. And that was a music series that I did. It was a live music series. I'm Ryan, at a honky tonk here in San Antonio, but taking that feedback and showing people that we listen, really did help, I think, the overall effectiveness of the series.
Yeah, and we're gonna have people who want to create an event-based digital story. We're gonna have people who wanna create what you're doing with UT San Antonio Online, where you're trying to influence an audience to think a certain way. We're gonna have people who are doing all kinds of storytelling projects. So I appreciate you sharing that specific example and and how it differs. Exactly. It's having the live feedback of a live audience sounds like a luxury that most of us will not be able to experience, especially because most of our work is online and you put it out there and you get a little bit of feedback, but it's often in the form of YouTube metrics or in the form of podcast analytics or in the form of likes or comments. And it's not as direct as a live audience experience. So sharing that, I think it's really fun to see the actual reaction on people's faces as you're doing a production is a different kind of storytelling, isn't it?
I think so.
Awesome. So I've talked to hiring managers and specifically in the public relations and the advertising space, what they tell me they're looking for are instead of a one-off story or a one-off billboard or a one-off ad, they want to see complete campaigns that are connected. They want to see the through line of problem solution thinking, of cause effect thinking in the stories that are being produced. This is why we focus on story worlds instead of just one story, right? With UT San Antonio Online, you're creating a story world of what is it like to earn your degree? What are the outcomes there? What are the impacts? How does that change not only your life, but your entire family's trajectory? You're crafting a story world from one project to the other that tells different pieces of that story. So a hiring manager would look at your work and say, "Oh, this is a beautiful through line. I can see what the problem was. I can see how they crafted the solution. I can see how they're creating a story world instead of just one particular project." What advice do you have for students who might be struggling to connect projects in a broader world, in a broader context?
That's always an exercise, and it can vary and it can be different depending on the scope and the sometimes the breadth of the work. But something that I can say that I think has been effective with this particular UT San Antonio Online project is, you know, we really thought about, and this goes back to the purpose of the videos that we were starting to create, and the change, ultimately the aesthetic change, the content, the subject matter change that we all agreed upon as a team that we wanted to shift to was what you just spoke about. So it's like we can all tell each other how great UT San Antonio is, right? And we can make a bunch of videos about how great it is. But what we realize is that, like, that's just the catalyst. Like, the degree is just the catalyst. The actual change and the real story is within the individuals. This focus on the overall transformation that people go through for their family or for their personal lives. It's taking that step and using the degree to make the change for themselves. But like it's that act that we realize is what we want to focus on, and how that looks like for everybody is different. And capturing that like little lightning in a bottle on a video form is what we kind of how we want to tell that story, and how it can be an impactful thing for people. That's one example. But if you have the ability to kind of think in a lead way about why your videos are, why they will and how they will be connected, will make you a stronger storyteller.
I'm so glad you used the word transformation because I've been in this a very long time. I've been teaching storytelling across different mediums for a long time. And the word transformation often is used to capture all of it, the drama, the conflict, the rising action, the falling action, those storytelling formulas, right?
That hero's journey, really, you can really see that after it's apparent. And once you see that one place, you'll never not see it again. It's so apparent. And how to use that skill and tell stories, and the arcs, and knowing the dips, and the rises is a skill to have. And you can only get better if you can just continue to identify it and share it. And what we're doing rather, is as storytellers, is we're not telling people stories, but we're working with them to tell their own stories. And we're using our skill set and our abilities to teach them how to do that in real time. But like, that's why I'm not telling your story, or rather I'm having you tell your story, and I'm helping you shape that. And that kind of makes people feel a bit more comfortable, especially if you've never met them before, and they're sharing something very personal, and they're trusting you that the content you're going to make is going to make them feel good about sharing that story.
And you mentioned the framework of the hero's journey, which is one of my personal favorites. You have the departure, to oversimplify, you have the departure, the initiation, and the return. And you have a whole bunch of subsets in there. Do you find yourself superimposing these story frames as you're speaking to someone, as you're interviewing someone? Or are you more like, oh, this is emerging like a hero's journey framework? Or oh, this is more of a climax kind of transformation story. How much superimposing of frameworks are you doing in real time as you're interviewing someone to help them tell their story the best way possible?
In my mind, I'm doing a lot more than I'm actually telling them. Like in real time, having them to share it. And then once we have the video and we have the transcript, then I do a bit more diving and like how to tell the story and like the right way to tell the story. But it does that step of bouncing those ideas off with, and I'm afforded to have another producer who works with me, who is a very, is Carrie Gold. So she's like my producer, but she's also a client. So it's a very special role, because it really forces us to think about the final product, and forces us to think about the content, the overall ending content, because how we get there starts with that first discussion rather, about, yeah, what kind of story are we trying to tell here? Does this kind of fit the arc? Is this not the right appropriate narrative, for what we're trying to get at, what we're really trying to achieve? And so I would say that those pre-production conversations will shape the final decision.
I love that you mentioned Carrie Gold because I interviewed her like last year. And so I didn't realize that y'all were working together. This is fantastic because I'm thinking about some of the things that she shared. One of the things that she shared, and I'm sure you'll echo, is looking for the legacy in that student's journey, and what kind of legacy they're creating. And I love that she used the word legacy because it gives me a frame to anchor and hang my hat on for telling a story or helping a student tell their story about what that degree meant to them. What are some other anchors that you have? Legacy is one. We talked about the hero's journey. What are some of those anchors that you have in your mind as you're listening to students tell their stories?
Yeah, I think the legacy is hard for certain people, because it doesn't. A lot of times, people don't really have the ability just yet, because of what their person going through, to be as introspective, or to really be as uh, really take a bird's eye view even about what they're doing. But what I would say is just like what I've always been interested in, and I started about like 12 years ago. I started this podcast called Delve Curiously, and it really was to like try to understand why people who I thought do interesting things, and they're mostly like creative folks, but like try to document why they do what they do. And I think that ability to just kind of like take that step of a bird's eye view, and seeing how it may resonate with someone else, or how it may build something for someone, a community, or reach another community, I think has been I've been the crux of what I do. and documenting people and that interest, because I think ultimately like we can be very effective as human beings if we do communicate and connect with other people. And in this day and age when we use video, is like that's how we do it, and that's why we should do what we do, and we should be documenting. And so I guess that's something that I want people just to be top of mind of, is to know why you're doing what you're doing, because that will hopefully shape your legacy, or how the legacy you want to leave, and how it may reach other people. So it's connected.
So purpose, it sounds like, is your driver. It's what is the purpose of this content and what is the purpose of this story? Whenever you have a student who gets flustered or who maybe loses their train of thought or is like, "Wait, I'm trying to follow what you want me to give you and I can't figure it out." How do you handle those students? Because I imagine it can be intimidating. Being on camera is intimidating. Answering questions is intimidating. In a podcast situation, we often have a little bit more control, but when you're interviewing someone live in the field to tell their story, you have less control there. So what kind of things are you doing there to help that person tell their story?
A great example is, again, is continuing to think about how we do what we do for UT San Antonio online. At the very beginning, when we have shared as much as we can in a pre-production with each other, we shared the scripts and we shared the questions that we're going to be talking about. Before we even start recording, Ryan, I mean, something I do is just sit down with them and say, okay, here's the goal of what we're trying to achieve. We want to create a video that's going to reach people. It's going to move a mark. It's going to say these kinds of things, and it's going to be about 2 minutes long, and really give people the final vision, the final product rather, align them with that vision so that they feel like they're part of it, that they're not being interrogated, and that they're not being a part of some sort of content grab that no one's ever going to see. It really trying to let them know and be a part of and get really buy-in from the beginning about like, this interview is going to take place in this kind of way. It's going to feel like this. It's going to sound like this. Getting them buy-in from the very beginning, I think, has really shown people to be a bit more confident in how they share what they share, if it is an interview that we're capturing that day.
Again, on this purpose angle, whenever you're producing something that could literally change someone's life, when you produce something that could make someone decide to go to university and elevate their socioeconomic status for the rest of their life, that purpose is very motivating, I imagine. What are some other things that you and Carrie can hang your hat on as motivators? Because I know if I was working on a project like this, I would be like, let's change some lives today, right? I would be like, this storytelling matters. Getting these student stories out there matters because it could inspire someone else to take a step that helps them in their entire life. What are the other motivators that you have in the back of your mind as you're working on these kinds of projects?
I think of a motivator for me is like always wanting to try something new for another set. If it's a new composition, if it's a new frame of questioning, if it's a new way of developing questions on pre-production. I mean, like I said, this implementation of AI on the front end is very new to our workflow, but it has proven and yielded some great results. And some of the results are even just like me trying something new. And like I said, that act of trying something new in an industry where things can always feel like you're doing the same thing really is important. And finding new ways to be inspired is something that I think people, especially creators and storytellers, should always aim to do, because things are changing and how we view content is changing. So just being fresh, I think it would be a suggestion there.
Awesome. And you mentioned using Claude earlier. What are the specific ways you're using AI in your workflows today?
Yeah, so a great example would be what we do with the transcript from the pre-production interview. So what we can do with that is we can take that into Claude, and I can tell Claude, I need you to act as my production assistant for a documentary we're producing. Share all of the documents beforehand and have Claude analyze them, and understand what we're working with. That's like the first step, is learning all the pieces of information. And then I say, okay, so now our next step, Claude, is really, we want to create a 3 acts play, a 3 act sort of story arc. Here's the goal. Here's how we want to do it. Here are the words we want to try to, maybe we've coded and marked already that we want to, in the transcript, that we want to really kind of drive as keywords. Also thinking about, again, the audience, this is going to be a particular format. It's got to be this duration. Really thinking about how we get there, and use Claude as really just another tool, and like I said, a pre-production assistant to kind of keep everything organized. And then once you have the transcript and it's analyzed, then you can really put together a sort of, if it's a script, have it develop some B-roll ideas. And that's really been helpful because that's sort of the grunt work, the sort of brain work that you ultimately want to try to have somebody else do so you can think about the creative work and what that's going to look like in that final product. And so I think when you ask me, like, am I thinking about the final product as I'm, in real time? Yeah, because I've been allowed to now with that off my plate as I'm thinking about what the words are saying, people are saying, I can really kind of visualize how we're going to get to the final piece. And so the Claude has really been helpful in, I guess, just organizing and communicating how we get to those steps and in the process.
And that's pre-production. What about in production and post-production? Has AI helped change that process? And if so, how?
I think in the production part, I've had it develop like it's a bit of pre-pro and pro. I've had it develop like checklists for me because a lot of times we have a revolving door of different crew. So for me, it's like everything we've described in pre-production, what can I have to streamline the process in production? So that's how it's helped there. In post-production, things are changing so much that AI is embedded in a lot of the tools that we use. Personally, I don't feel like it's there yet for me to really utilize a lot of the capabilities in post-production. And that's things like color, that's things like sound. I personally haven't seen it and don't want it to just yet because I feel like that's where a lot of the humanness really can shine. But in terms of the pre-production, it's helped greatly. It can only help even more as creatives. Think about our skill sets, right? Think about what we want to go all in. What other tools can we have to help maybe things that we aren't as great, maybe our weaknesses or things we aren't as great on? How can it elevate those things at the same time? And I think that's where it's helped me be a bit more organized.
And have you played with some of the video generation models?
Yeah, I mean, I have. Yeah. And it's cool.
How, where do you see things going there?
I mean, personally, if you really want to ask me and you really want to open up a can of worms, I think that we are at an existential point in our time right now. But I think in history, but I ultimately think that because of we are where we are right now, there's going to be a great um I'm calling it a human renaissance, in that people are ultimately only going to get recognized that things are more and maybe get a bit more tired or jaded of AI and realize that as human beings, like this is why we exist, to be creative, to use tools, to share and connect with other people. I think a lot of the AI video generation is very cool, but until it gets really, really good, then I don't think it's totally necessary for me just yet in post production.
So you do see a place where it could be that good where you would invite it into your process. We're not there yet, but you see it coming.
I see it coming. Yeah, I see it coming. I mean, it's only going to get better, and it certainly will. I mean, there's already video films and movies made strictly from AI. I mean, that will only increase. But as that increases, I think that there will be a shift in the demand for more humanness and less computer generated
I
content.
hope the authenticity wins. I hope the people win. Uh, Sources for inspiration. Where are you going for inspiration? I know you have some books that you probably have relied on. Maybe you have some podcasts or some YouTube channels. Where do you go if you really want to learn something and level up your digital storytelling game?
Yeah, I mean, YouTube certainly is that. There is a guy named Lucas Forsyth who is a documentarian and he's worked in the media industry and he does a lot of these deep dives into the history of or rather our sort of analysis on where we are right now in terms of the media industry. So he's one person I would check out in terms of just being creative. Like there are videos and films that I'll need to go back and watch to be inspired. And those are people um like Les Blank, like a documentarian. There's a people like Liz Maillet, documentarian. And there's just great storytellers that I just love to watch. Think people like David Lynch is one of my favorites. And how he tells his stories are so different, right? And that just goes to show you that storytelling is different for everybody. But ultimately, you want to bring people to a sense of feeling to them and meet people where they are. And I think that anytime you can really meet people where they are and be inspired by other content that maybe that you haven't made before, will keep you sharp and fresh. And I think that's kind of like why I want to push for ideas, like I said, of vertical video may not be the end all be all, but you see people trying new things and industries trying new ways of being creative. And I think if you can keep your mind open, that will serve you as a great deal as a storyteller or creative.
As an open mind, absolutely. I have to ask, what's your favorite David Lynch?
I like them all, but if you really had to like hold a gun to my head, and or rather, if you really had to ask me, if you really had to ask me what it would be, probably Blue Velvet, or I mean, there's something about, and I think this is my favorite just because I had this conversation with a friend of mine, because it was a change in time, was Inland Empire, because that's where it was like a major shift in how he told stories, right? He was his first time using a digital camera, and it was consumer grade digital video, but that wasn't ever used in that way before. And I think that itself is a way of being fresh and being open minded to try new things. And I think he learned a great deal of telling that story and making that film as a storyteller himself. I think maybe a way to be a bit more authentic, because you have the ability to, right? You have the ability to just kind of turn a camera on, don't have to worry about film, and just record. And I think that changed a lot for a lot of people, different ways to tell stories.
It's opening ways of thinking about creation that weren't available before. I remember when I got my first digital camera, I was just taking so many more photos of everything. This was in college, and I was an early adopter for digital cameras because people were still using film, and it changed the way I thought about taking pictures, really. I was able to experiment far better. And the experience of, for example, in college, I took a photography class, and I remember being in the dark room and being able to make those adjustments physically that I had previously only been able to make on Photoshop, right? So it's like, oh, this is the literal physical analog to that Photoshop darken button, right? And the multiply button with the light and the black and white film. I think that the more experiences you have in different mediums, the more it opens you up to creative expression. You worked in radio, you've worked in video. What else have you worked in? I'm curious. Are those the main two avenues you've explored for telling stories?
Yeah, and then in my personal life, I'm a musician, so I've had experience doing that, and I think it's all related, right? It's all communicating, and I think that's ultimately why I really enjoyed learning from you too, Ryan. Is you've one just kind of anecdote is that a lot of the folks that we've interviewed for in these graduate profiles have mostly been comms students, and they've all had great things to say about you, and I've only just attest to that, because I mean, how we communicate is only more relevant in this day and age, and how effective we communicate is only going to be even more relevant moving forward. And I think that I have to just tip my hat to you, and everything I learned from your class, and everything I'm doing now. I still think about, and so that's something I want people to think about when they think about the purpose, think about the process, think about evaluation. Think about all of that at the front end, because that will ultimately make the process or the project more effective.
I think that most of our communication majors are already pretty darn special and amazing before we get to teach them. But it's wonderful to see a communication major who has gone on to a digital storytelling career, because I feel like a lot of people have that as their passion project, but they're not able to do it professionally. Obviously, that changes with our new digital media influence major. But even before that major, I feel like a lot of it was passion projects as opposed to I'm going to do this professionally. Do you have advice for people who want to move their passion into the professional realm? For people who are having this as a side hustle or a side job instead of their main way of making a living?
I do, and I think it's very relevant to why I'm where I'm at, why I am where I am now, and why I chose this particular choice of career. And if you do the same, if you want to be a storyteller and you want to make that your profession, keep your side projects going, keep that flame burning all the time. Don't stop. But if you need to make money, you need a career, consider this, that there are other organizations, and some that you may personally align with, some that may be a bit of a challenge for you to, and that's good, right? Because that ultimately challenges how you tell stories. But what you want to try to do is you want to try to get connected with an organization, get connected with a brand who's interested in telling that's their story, and who need people to help tell their story. So that's something that I would consider is like, if there's a nonprofit, you may not make as much money, but if there's like a big brand that's making a lot of money that has an opening, or organization you feel very strongly about that could benefit from having an authentic storyteller on board, and people need that. I mean, as storytellers, we have the advantage because we can connect with people, we can understand a problem, build a solution, and sometimes that solution is creative. And a lot of times it's really just getting people to understand how to tell stories. And a lot of folks need that these days. So I will say that, like, Take that approach, keep an open-minded approach, and have it be outside the box, because you never know where that will lead you, and you never know who may need your help. So that's something I will encourage people to do.
And as we wrap up here, do you have one final thought you want people to take home from this conversation? We've covered research, planning, implementation, evaluation. We talked about AI. We talked about Lynch. We covered a lot of topics here. But if you want them to remember one thing from listening to this conversation, what would it be?
Make time to be curious, and what that means is going to be different for everybody. But there's so much information available these days, and it's so easy to find information. But as you are thinking about the tools to get the information, that purpose, right? Like, why you want to find out what you want to find out. If you come from a place of true authentic curiosity, that will shine in your storytelling, versus somebody who's doing it from a place of maybe not as authentic, or really just trying to sell something. Really come to the ability that you, as a storyteller, are a human being, and you're trying to reach another human being, another person, and how you want to do that, and being creative and curiosity, will help you be a stronger storyteller.
Where can people find Rob Martinez online if they want to connect?
So I am actually not on social media anymore, but you can find me on LinkedIn. That's like the only thing I really have at the moment. Don't try to find me. Go turn your computer off and go on a walk instead, or go on a run. I really want to advocate people to consider what life was like before social media. So that's something I'll leave people at.
Fantastic. So find you on LinkedIn and then go outside for a nice walk in nature, touch some grass, breathe some fresh air, enjoy life because you only get one.
That's exactly right.
Awesome. Rob, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate you.
Thank you.